We will be starting shortly. My name is Sharon Roberson. I'm the president and CEO of the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. I thank you so much for joining the YWCA for our Stand Against Racism Lunch and Learn with our topic today, becoming a better ally. Just a note, we have rebranded ourselves from our traditional Stand Against Racism to encompass Stand Against Injustice, because it is very important for us to understand that if we stand up for justice in our society, then we are also standing up to eliminate racism, which is part of the YW's mission. As many of you know, schools have recently started back. Our children have had so many challenges. Our children, especially in our public school system, already had challenges even prior to COVID. They have been out of school for a long time. There are economic pressures. There are societal pressures, social media. All of those things have come together such that it is very important for us to understand some of the issues that we may face in helping shepherd these students into adulthood. In order for us to be aware of the challenges facing our students, today we're examining the school to prison pipeline. Some of you may not understand how this works. We have 3 experts that will help educate us. And as I always say in these lunch and learns, we want to give you a tool for your toolkit. So when you are part of the broader community, you can better help them understand that this is a significant issue. And this is uniquely an American problem. And we have it here in Nashville. Children as young as 3 and 4 year olds are being suspended or even expelled from school. This system disproportionately impacts Black and Brown children, children with disabilities, and LGBTQ youth. We know that once children interface with the juvenile legal system, they are 67% more likely to end up in jail again before they are 25 years of age. Today, these panelists are going to help us. They work in spaces where young people are impacted. They will help us understand how to work to stop the school to prison pipeline. They'll also let us know what it looks like in our own local community. Before we get started, I would like to thank Nissan Foundation for making this webinar possible and free. This conversation, we hope, will build community, spark dialogue, and build a consciousness of legacies of discrimination and oppression. We also have a peace sponsor, PNC Bank. Thank you for your significant support. Now let's get started. We would like for each of the panelists to introduce themselves and the organization they work with and how this work is related to the school to prison pipeline. I'll start with my dear friend, Judge Sheila Callaway.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am super happy to be a part of this panel and love any opportunity that I can share to talk about the school to prison pipeline. As you stated, I am Judge Sheila Callaway. I am currently the juvenile court judge here in Nashville, Tennessee. And this is a talk that is real to me. It is something that I see each and every day, and something that I am working hard along with my staff to make relationships with the police and the school system, as well as the community, to understand how real of a problem this is. And so I'm happy to be here and to answer any questions. Thank you. Sharon, I think you're on mute.
Next, I'll go with Reginald Ash Nash with the Education Trust.
Thank you, Sharon. Good to see everyone today. My name is Reggie Nash. I serve as External Relations Manager for the Education Trust in Tennessee. Ed Trust is a national nonprofit education research and advocacy organization that really is committed to improving educational outcomes and increasing equity and access for all students, but particularly students of color and those from low-income backgrounds. We've been here in Tennessee for about 2.5 years. It's wild because time really flies. But the school to prison pipeline and really thinking about restructuring what school discipline looks like in our schools has been a targeted priority of Ed Trust throughout the span of its existence. Here in Tennessee and in partnership on the national level with our policy team, as well as partners in our statewide advocacy coalition, the Tennessee Alliance for Equity in Education, we've really engaged on a number of state level issues related to improving the experiences of students in combating the school to prison pipeline. That looks like our work on uplifting youth voice, pushing for social, emotional, academic development, and our advocacy around policies, practices, and bills, such as opposing corporal punishment, the Harm for Teacher Discipline Act, opposing legislation that targets LGBTQ plus students, and also supporting good legislation, such as a proposed ban on early elementary school suspensions and expulsions. We've also done a lot of work alongside the Tennessee School Counselor Association and other orgs, really seeking to increase investments in school counselors, psychologists, and other support systems. So really excited to be here on this panel today and hope that I can add some value to the conversation.
Thank you. And Johnnie Hatten with Disability Rights Tennessee.
Good afternoon. My name is Johnnie Hatten. I'm with Disability Rights Tennessee. I am one of the advocate/investigator on the child and youth team. It is our task to protect the rights of individuals with disabilities in the state of Tennessee. And one of our areas of work we look at is going into the school system and providing the appropriate SPED services for students in the academic area as well as the behavior area when it comes down to their IEPs and getting a behavior intervention plan created. So much, I'm glad to be here.
All right. I'll go back to you, Ms. Hatten. We do know that children with disabilities are often overlooked in the school system, and disabilities are sometimes visible and sometimes invisible. Talk to me about the systems in the school systems that contribute to the school to prison pipeline for those students who have disabilities.
Great, I'm glad you asked that. What we're seeing is in our school system, there's a need for us to continue to address the appropriate behavior services for each individual student. And that looks at having a comprehensive evaluation that sets aside what's actually going on. We call them adaptive behavior scores. And those scores help us to say, is it hypertension? Is it the ability not stay on task in the classroom? So it gives us a deeper dive on what's really going on with that child. And once we identify those behaviors, we've got to make sure that we're giving them the appropriate and effective supports to work with them on those behaviors. Because to identify an issue and not provide a cure to it, it is totally insane. So if we're recognizing this child has ADHD, but we're not providing them with supports that they need, it is a way to, it's a failure to those students. So what we're doing is continue to have that conversation. That's whenever that a child has been diagnosed, like you said, most of the time, when we talk about mental health disabilities, you can't see it. It's mental. And most of the kids are overlooked because they may not come in on a crutch. You can see that there's a disability that way, but because it can't be visible, then they're sometimes overlooked or is being played down because we can't see it. And our terms we used to say is, he's just a bad child. But we've got a diagnosis of a disability and we've got to start addressing that disability as it is.
All right. Well, Mr. Nash, same question, but what systems in the school system do you see that contribute to the school to prison pipeline?
Yes, there's really a number of systems and practices that I think really contribute to this. Pervasive kind of no excuses attitudes, policies that really force students to do things, even our youngest learners, to like walk on tape in straight lines, to sit in silence for extended periods of time, to only speak when spoken to, forced isolation within the school environment, or worse, a complete excommunication from the school community. Like those types of really stringent behavioral standards have explicit connections to prison culture. A lot of these practices really dehumanize our children and take the joy out of school and learning, replacing a place where students should really feel loved, feel seen, feel supported and included, with a really punitive culture of fear, intimidation, and harsh consequences. And as you pointed out really astutely in the introduction, these have really disproportionate impacts on students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, and students with disabilities. Statewide, Black and Latino students and students with disabilities experience expulsion and out-of-school suspension at higher rates than their peers. According to state-level data from TDOE, Black students are expelled at 5 times the rate of their white peers, and Latino students at twice the rate. When we think about out-of-school suspension, Black students are suspended at nearly 4 times that rate. So, when we think about those practices, in addition to the data, you have to really start questioning, these are not coincidental. Like some of this is by design and really systemic in nature. We've also seen a 35% increase in school resource officers being placed in school over the last several school years. So there's just a lot of questions that we need to ask about systems, and also think about the practices and training that are provided to folks who are, trusted to enforce discipline in our schools, to think about what are those implications for all students, but particularly those that are really showing up in this data in disproportionate ways.
All right, Judge Callaway, he's talking about zero tolerance. He's talking about policies in the school system. Tell us what you've seen.
I think Reggie absolutely got it on the nail and hit it hard and absolutely correctly. There are so many policies and rules that we place on our children in our school systems that when they mess up, and it could be a very small mess up, but then we are putting them on a trajectory that is going to end them in front of me or a criminal system later on in their life. And so we have to do a better job of making sure that we are identifying what these rules, policies, whatever it is that are detrimental to the healthy growth of our youth, and to make a difference. There was a study done by the Tennessee Department of Education several years ago that talked about when we are disciplining our students, what are we disciplining for? And literally, that study showed that 83% of discipline incidences were for violating rules. There were only about 9% for fighting, 2% for assaulting a student or a teacher, 1% for bullying, 1% for threats, 1% for theft, 1% for possession of drugs, and 2% other. So if we are disciplining our students at 83% for violating rules, then we have an issue, we have a problem. And so we have to take a look at what those rules are. And I said, we were part of juvenile court, was part of Positive and Safe Schools Advancing Greater Equity initiative that came to Nashville Public Schools probably around 2014, 2015, because we were one of the highest rates of schools with disparity in discipline across the country. We were rated one of the highest. And so they came in to examine what we were doing and what we needed to be help on. And it was clear that, the biggest reason that people were being suspended or expelled was for conduct unbecoming of a student. And we sat back and said, well, who decides what unbecoming is? And is unbecoming the same for me as it is for someone else? And so why are we expelling and suspending students for something that's so subjective, that doesn't really have anything to do with safety of the school or education or anything? And so when we looked at that, we made a deliberate effort to change what the policy stated. Now, we changed the policies, but there was still a way that some principals and teachers could get around and still use that as a rule violation. And so why am I suspending someone if I have a dress code and they violate the dress code once, twice, and then at that third time, we're giving them the school the opportunity to escalate and perhaps suspend or expel. But did we figure out why the child was violating the school dress policy? Did they have the dress? Did they have the means to have something? And instead of looking at the cause or the purpose, what we're doing is suspending for and expelling for things that we should think twice about. And the issue for me is when you expel and you suspend youth and you do exclusionary discipline that takes them out of the school building and out of a structured place, you put them back in the community. And a lot of times these students don't have parents who can stay home with them and watch them while they're being excluded from the school system. And so then what happens is they find other things to do, other people to hang with, and other places to go. And so that's when that prison pipeline starts opening, because that's usually when I find that they'll come into the court system. And so we have to take a really hard look at, why are we pushing people out of the school building? If they're violating rules, teach them the rules, help them to learn how to not violate them, but keep them in a structured place where they have the same opportunity for learning, and they are not placed in a pipeline for prison.
All right, thank you. So we're talking about some of these zero tolerance policies. We're talking about the minor infractions that can get a child kicked out of the school system. I'm going to tell a little story to this panel and to this group. We at the YW operate the largest domestic violence shelter in the state of Tennessee. And most of the time there are half the number of people are children. Right now we have 25 children in the Weaver Center. And many of those children are school age and they do go to school. These are children that have had significant trauma, adverse childhood experience they wrote the book on, but they go to school. One of the children, one day, her mother told her case manager that she could not go to school because she didn't have the uniform. They were so outside the system, they didn't realize she had to have a certain uniform, and they were actually going to expel her if she came again without the required uniform. Now, I was naive in that I thought the people at the school system, which some people in the school system did know about her circumstance, but literally this child was in a domestic violence shelter with her mother, came there with nothing. We, of course, were able to get her several uniforms that she could use to go to school, but if she hadn't been in Weaver, she would have been a child whose mother had the burdens of the world on her and gotten expelled from school. So that's what we're talking about. She would have literally been expelled for her third time of not being in compliance with the uniform standard. And I did find it hard to believe that someone did not say, well, baby, why don't you have this? Now, it could have been she was embarrassed about her circumstances, and kids get embarrassed like the rest of us. But let me go to you, Johnnie, because you work with kids and there are students, parents, and teachers, and you deal with parents that have struggles. The teachers are having to work with these students, and I don't take that lightly. They have a hard road too. But talk about what impact these sorts of policies have on the students, the parents, and the teachers.
A major impact. I want to give you a quote. So 86.2% of every youth in DCS custody had a prior child welfare system. And in that system, we have found that there was no intentional engagement to try to rectify this problem. We have seen them just placed in a particular facility or residential treatment program, but there was nothing intentional to rectify the issue with that parent or family therapy. And guess what? These kids got to go back into that same community. So there was no community intentional engagement with that community. And it is sad because what do we say to, what are the schools doing, like you said, to foster those relationships when things are broken in the home? What are we doing as a school system to try to prevent a child from being expelled because they don't have a uniform? And we know that though we have Title I funds provided in the school system that's supposed to be providing for the needs of our students. So when we as advocates, when we know these things, and sad to say the parents are not knowing of these things, we got to make sure that we hold everybody accountable. Here's your role in this situation. Here's what you need to do in order to make sure that this does not become a lasting impact on the life of that child, that parent, and ultimately that community. Because again, the whole community suffers. And once it's been displayed, this has happened to this child, it's in the community, and so that negative image is on that community. So we've got to be intentional about addressing everything in every area of that child life in order for us to get some better policy and better outcomes, and don't leave scars on our young people.
All right, well, Mr. Nash, tell us something about the impact on the students, the parents, and even the teachers of this system that we have.
Absolutely. I think I'll start with the students, and I think about the message that it sends. That culture of exclusion really explicitly says to them that there's no room for error, there's no room for lessons to be learned, there's no room for them to be supported or re-socialized or reincorporated into the school community, that there are really no excuses or avenues for redemption. And the psychological effect that has on our students, especially our youngest learners. You talked about 3 and 4-year-olds, and I was formerly a kindergarten teacher over in Memphis. That really tells them that they're unworthy, that they're unloved, that they're unable to thrive or meet the expectations of school, that school and learning is not for them, and that they must be separated and isolated. And that's problematic. I mean, the American Psychological Association has actually released research after research showing the correlations between student removal from the school environment and the later likelihood of arrest and incarceration. That's a really dangerous message and a trend that is disproportionately sent to our students of color, when really, if the time, the care, and the attention, and most importantly, the resources were invested to support the whole child and actually understand what they're facing in their lives, what they're experiencing beyond the walls of the school, even what they're experiencing within the school, and what they need to really feel supported, to feel valued, and to feel included, then these outcomes could look a whole lot different. Ms. Hatten really astutely spoke to kind of how it affects teachers as well, but parents as well. And parents often have their hands tied in these situations. I mean, the story that you told about the Weaver Center, when I taught kindergarten in Memphis, in many of my schools, parents, I was in the Fraser community, so in a Title I school, low-income neighborhood, chronically in the bottom 10%. It was an achievement school district school. Most of my parents were working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. When their kids are removed from the learning environment, one of 2 things often happens. Either the students are left home unattended because family members are working or unavailable to supervise them, which could lead to even worse circumstances like Judge Callaway spoke to, or parents are at risk of losing important wages due to their time away trying to run up to the school, trying to see what's going on, or having to take time off that they realistically can't afford to try to address what's going on with their children. So it's really a vicious cycle. And, we'll never take lightly the struggles that our teachers face. And they're often operating in under-resourced circumstances. We had a rotating school counselor to serve the whole district in Memphis under the ASD. There's just a lack of resources and investments to support the really gargantuan need that students have.
All right, Judge Callaway, let's talk about this. You see all 3. You see the students, parents, perhaps you see school administrators and teachers in the courtroom. So what happens?
Both Reggie and Johnnie talked about it so eloquently. It affects our entire community. It literally affects the safety of our community when we use exclusionary discipline methods. And it affects all of us. And, as Reggie was talking about with the children, I remember a couple of cases that we had. And, when I tell these stories, I always say, I get it as a school teacher. I'm not sure how I would handle these situations either. But there was one child that we had at an elementary school who was in the cafeteria and refused to go back to her classroom. And it took, the teacher a long time to try and get that person. They actually ended up calling for Metro Police to come to see if they could do something. And so, the police come and their response is not, let's get this child back to school, but we come to circumstances and we either arrest or we don't arrest. And in this circumstances, this child's not abiding by the school rules and refusing to go back to the classroom. And, the school could not get in touch with their guardian. So what else did the police have to do? And so the police felt no other option but to arrest that child and bring them to juvenile court. How is that child going to feel safe going back to that school? And so after she came to our detention facility, and we had an opportunity to look into what was going on. She had recently lost her parent and was living with a relative. And I imagine there was something that had triggered her that day that made her feel like she couldn't go back to the classroom. That should not have been a police response, but some type of mental health response instead. That child should never have been handcuffed and placed into a police car and brought to a detention facility. That absolutely psychologically damages our youth. And when we do that, we literally are changing the structure of their brain. And the last part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that's the last part to clearly develop. When we start putting trauma on children, that makes their decision-making ability compromised. And so not only does it have absolutely psychological effects on our youth, but it actually affects their brain development. And so when they're growing and they're continuing to make risky, bad choices, we can look back on the trauma that they went through, a lot of it in a school system, to show how we as adults have caused that trauma. And so then you look at, the efforts for that child to be reunited with a school after they've gone through that trauma. It is very difficult for them to feel safe in that type of environment again. And so then they are combative, they are angry, they are bitter, and you put them in a place where people are always constantly saying, do better, be better, look up, walk in a straight line, do this, do that. And they are already behind the 8 ball, and it makes it more difficult. For parents in this situation, the majority of the parents that we see in the courthouse are not parents that can easily take off work and come and sit all day in court, or come and immediately get the child from class if they're having a breakdown. They are hardworking parents who are, if they miss work, if they miss an hour of work, they risk losing their job. They risk losing money to pay to feed their children. They miss out if they have to stop to come and deal with disciplinary issues for a child at a school system. And so it's super difficult. And then, the fact that they may have to come to court and sit all day on a case where a child probably never should have been arrested or brought in front of the court system is just another barrier for a parent to have to deal with. And so you're dealing with parents who don't have the ability or the effort or the means to really have to deal with this. And then a lot of them don't even know how to truly advocate for their child through the system. And, they don't know how to ask for an IEP. They don't know how to ask for a hearing on a disciplinary issue. We have a lot of Hispanic kids who the letter that says you have the right to appeal the suspension and you have the right to do it in 10 days, the letter is in English and they don't speak Spanish. I mean, they don't speak or read English. And so that does not give them the adequate opportunity to advocate for their children. So it affects our parents in so many different ways. And, I love not love telling this story, but another story that I know had a direct effect on the principal and the teacher, another child who literally was having a mental health breakdown. No questions about it. The child was undressed and got undressed in the middle of the classroom, defecated on themselves, and was throwing it around the room. Super traumatic for everybody in the room, including the teacher and the principal. We don't call the police for that. We have to call Metro, we have to call Mobile Crisis or someone else. Unfortunately, when they did call Mobile Crisis and they did what they thought that they needed to do, because they knew this was not something that they had to arrest a child for, Mobile Crisis said, well, is the child suicidal or is the child homicidal? And they were like, well, no, she's just throwing shit. And so what do you do with that? And so Mobile Crisis, based on their policies, wouldn't come out to deal with it. And so in the end, it was a call to the police with a brought to detention. And we have to stop doing that. And, the good side of that, the trauma for the teacher and the principal that had to go through that, knowing that they were trying to do the right thing, knowing that they were having the right response, but getting a brick wall and a barrier on how to proceed on this. So we were able to successfully have a meeting with Mobile Crisis, police, schools, to say this cannot be the response ever. We cannot do that. And to change the policies of how Mobile Crisis would respond in the future. And so it's the effect of school to prison pipeline, exclusionary discipline affects the community in such dramatic ways. If people, always are asking me as a juvenile court judge, how can we keep our community safe? It's your job to make sure children aren't committing crimes. I can do that with the help of everyone if we're keeping our youth in the school system. If we're excluding them, they're out on their own. Community safety is not enhanced. In fact, it's affected in a negative way. And so we have to work together to find better resolution on how to deal with behavioral issues in the school.
Thank you. I do know that when we spend time in the adult system, you will see people that say, my mom was working 3 jobs. I was left on my own. I fell in with a bad crowd. I dropped out of school at 12. I dropped out of school at 15. This cycle and these stories you hear over and over and over. So this is really what we're talking about and what we're addressing. This whole cycle of behavior with the school system starting it. But there are a lot of forms of oppression that overlay this pipeline, because when we say that Brown, Black, and students with disabilities are primarily the focus, that means what you're really looking at is racism, sexism, and ableism, because it's probably mostly boys too. Black boys, brown boys, disabled boys. And so what we need to look at is how these other forms of oppression really contribute to things. Is the system more inclined toward punishing, let's say, a ADHD Black child who suffered trauma, who's a boy? Judge Callaway.
Unfortunately, I do think our system is more inclined to punish or use punitive methods based on what they know. And, I always laugh because I am one who definitely talks and uses my hands, and I can be very dramatic. And so when I was younger and I was loud and I was active, I fortunately had a wonderful parent who knew how to advocate. I had an educator as a mother who knew the first time a teacher set me outside the classroom, and granted, my behavior probably should have been said outside the classroom, or should have had something happen to me, not said in the classroom, but my mother knew to advocate. And she went to that school and said, I don't care what my child does, you will not remove her from the learning process. You will come up with another way. But she was educated and knew how to do that. And so what we have is we use punitive methods based on what we grew up with, based on what we learned, based on what we were taught. And so if you have a school system that is predominantly led by white individuals who have not had a lot of interaction with Black or brown people and don't know how they interact with one another, and they tend to use more punitive behaviors on punishment. You know, I remember a teacher talking about one of her students and talking about how that student, every time was asked a question, would yell the answer. And she never could understand that and couldn't get a feel on it. This was a teacher who was willing to go that extra mile and figure things out. And so she actually did a home visit with that child and found out the child had like 9 or 10 folks living in the house, and the only way you could get your point across was to yell. And so that's how they were used to communicating with one another. And so you don't learn that. If you don't take the time to learn that, you're excluding someone from the learning process because based on something that they are used to and what they're taught in their house. And we have to make sure that we have people who are in the schools, whether it's counselors, whether it's well educated on cultural identity issues, people who recognize that just because this isn't how I grew up and how I learned, I cannot walk in a straight line. It's just not in my system. I move every time I'm walking, and you can't place that restriction on me and expect me to do well and then punish me for what's innately part of my character. And so we've got to make sure that we're having people within our school systems that absolutely understand that.
All right, Mr. Nash, I'll go back to you. Tell us a little bit about this. A lot of really the forms of oppression that overlay the policies and procedures in the system that end up with the results that we know. We know that these children are not, just problems on their own, but why is the system resulting in this disproportional share of Black, brown, and children with challenges? I hate to say disabled because I just think they're children with some special needs that we need to take care of. Why is it that we have this outcome?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head. Like those particular layers of systemic oppression, thinking about racism, sexism, and ableism, really do lead to these disparate outcomes seen among students of color, particularly Black girls, as well as our students receiving IDEA accommodations, as well as other individualized learning services. Actually, to speak to this, I'd like to refer to a recent Ed Trust report that came out in late 2020. It was a partnership of the Education Trust National, as well as the National Women's Law Center. And the report was entitled, "And They Cared, How to Create Better, Safer Learning Environments for Girls of Color." And I'll plop that in the chat momentarily. But some of their findings were really insane and alarming to read. Thinking about preschoolers, so we know we're talking about 3 and 4-year-olds, they found that where Black girls only made up about 20% of girls that are enrolled in preschool, they represented 53% of out-of-school suspensions. For 3 and 4-year-old girls, 53%. Nationally, talking about all grade bands, Black girls were found to be 5 times more likely to be suspended and 4 times more likely to be arrested at school than their white female peers. And then when we drill down more specifically to state level data from the Tennessee Department of Education, we see that of all public school girls who are receiving out of school suspension, Black girls make up nearly 66% of all suspensions. That's worse than the national rates that I just cited. So, when we're starting to see these kind of outcomes and that high level of disparity and overrepresentation, you have to really question the systems and the biases that are at play. Something else I want to speak to that wasn't listed in kind of that initial list, but thinking about harmful policies that specifically target and oppress LGBTQ plus students. You have so many students who are trying to navigate a public school system that is extremely punitive, extremely harmful to them. We know what the data shows about likelihood of, suicide ideation or attempt amongst these communities. When we think about that intersectionally for Black and Latino students who are members of the LGBTQ plus community, when you layer these levels of oppression on top of each other, this is creating a really harmful, a really dangerous school system for them. And it takes all of us to push back against that. I mean, the data shows it, like the numbers are clear. So we have to really interrogate how these systems are at play. And I also think explicitly call them what they are, levels of systemic oppression.
Thank you. And I'll go to you, Ms. Hatten, because I've always felt that there were so many children with challenges at home that because school systems and teachers specifically are trained professionals, that they should be very accepting and understand children that they view as different and not overlay any personal beliefs into how children should be. And this is very important for children who are special needs and for the LGBTQ students, because there's been a lot in the media about teachers excluding children who don't fit what their personal beliefs are. But Ms. Hatten, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the other forms of oppression, or really racism and injustice that these students face within this system.
Right, and I think it's a double punishment. It is, number one, I have labeled you because I don't understand your norms. I don't understand your culture. So therefore, I've got this label on you. And so I'm watching you. And when you make one false move, I'm categorizing you into that same group that I categorize the other groups. And so to me, it's a double punishment. It's like they don't even have a chance when it come into the school system because of that issue, that someone don't understand their culture or their norms or their background. So this automatic label them, and then that labeling now has wind them up in the juvenile justice system. And like you said, sadly, it will be in the adult system as well. But I think we just have to get to the point to where we've got to bring more oversight in these situations. We've got to be transparent. We've got to have cultural sensitive conversations in the school system, in the JJ system, and all the systems, because this is what reality, this is what life is moving into, and we've got to be able to adjust with those changes.
And that's one thing I've always thought of, is that people outside of the school system sometimes don't interact with people that are in different communities. I know that there have been times where people in our Weaver Center and our other programs in Girls Inc. or Girls Inc. affiliate and our Men Together, and people are acting different. And I've even had staff members to kind of be taken aback. And Sheila, this goes to what you're saying of someone being loud, but see, I grew up in a big, loud Black family, so I was just like, what's the issue? What are you concerned about? It threw me totally off that someone, when they heard loud noises, would feel upset and intimidated. But I too had to understand that was so different than what they understood, And when you have 12 kids on my father's side of the family, 11 on my mother's family, to be heard, they had to jump in it. And so I always, uncles and aunts and cousins, everybody was just loud talking over each other. And it takes, I guess, an understanding of that to not be, I guess, intimidated and afraid. And these children are in the same situations at home. So Ms. Hatten, let's go back to you, because we always want there to be some sort of call to action. We always want you to say, you have this ability with these people to tell them something that will educate them, really something they need to absolutely take away from this panel.
And my takeaway point would be, If you see something as a parent, go get tested. If your son or daughter is saying, Mom, I got a headache, my tummy's hurting, I've been throwing up all night, you take them to the doctor. So if you're seeing something that's abnormal, that's not normal for your son or your daughter to be engaging in, you take them to a licensed psychiatrist and have that conversation. Once we have that conversation, is there a disability, or is there something that you need assistance in getting done? If you go to the doctor and he does have a virus, he or she has a virus, they give him medicine. Or if not medicine, they say watch it for the next couple of days, give him plenty of water. They're giving you what you need to do to successfully let that virus take its course. And so when we go to psychiatrists and we get a diagnosis of a disability or a concern that we take that to the school and say, hey, this is why little Bobby is jumping up all the time, is because his psychiatrist has said he has ADHD. And because of that, I would like to first start off with a 504 plan. Let's get a 504 plan in place that identifies that disability and also bring in accommodations that the school can make for that child. And then after that, we move forward to, okay, if he's continuing to have those behavior problems, he continue to get suspended or going to ISS, OSS. Let's move to the next level and let's get what we call a functional behavior assessment done on that child. And once that functional assessment done, what it does is identify what's the antecedent, what's causing little Bobby to jump up every 5 minutes, what's causing him to continue to raise his hand. And that's done not by a PE coach. That is done by someone who expertise in behavior. What we say at Disabilities Rights Tennessee, we would like a board certified behavior analyst doing those behavior plans, because these people specialize in that. That's why we have regular ed teachers and we have SPED certified teachers. There's a reason behind all of that. And so we've got to go back to the knowledge that if we know a coach, a PE coach is not going to give you the best behavior intervention plan, let's not even use him. Let's go with someone else. And then call on our partners. The Kennedy Center in Nashville is awesome. I've been recommending them left and right to a lot of schools, a lot of parents, because they are the experts. They have the evidence-based models that shows if we work on this area, we're going to curve this behavior one way or another. And so my suggestion to parents is, if you see something abnormal, don't just sit there and wait on it. Act on it. Get the help that your child needs. Take that recommendation to the school and let's get some help in the school system so we can make sure that we are curving this change. And not only there, I want to also say this here too, because we actually want to stop in the school system, but it continues. Even if they go to the juvenile detention centers, they go to these other treatment, that plan follows them. IDA says they can get into their 22 years old. They got to continue to work that plan, even in a juvenile facility. And so that's why we're seeing not just on the school level, but on every level of their life that they're going to. We've got to make sure that we're maintaining that plan, that we know it has worked in the past when we've got licensed agencies to come in and work that plan the correct way. Thank you.
All right, and Mr. Nash, let me go to this point because I did see someone in the chat say this, and I always think of my mother who started teaching. My mother passed away about a year ago, but she spent 40 years in the classroom as both a teacher and a principal. Her first job was in a little town called Augusta, Arkansas, in a one-room schoolhouse, basically, where you had all grades together. But even then, they understood that they needed to feed the kids. These were little farm kids, and even though they were growing up raising other people's crops as a sharecropper, oftentimes they did not get as much food as they could get once they got to school. But they always made sure the kids were fed, because that was step one, that they needed to have a level of nutrition in order to learn. Now, I don't know why in a one-room schoolhouse in segregated Arkansas, they understood that. Probably because my mother died at 91, so you know how old this was. how they understood that, but today that seems to be an issue. That's something to keep top of mind, that these kids need to be fed when they're in the school system. So Mr. Nash, let's talk about this. What do you want people to take away from this conversation?
Definitely. I think there's so many different ways that folks can lean in to disrupt these patterns. I think for one, if you're in schools or even a community person who has the opportunity to lean into schools, really think to encourage cultures of belonging, understanding, emotional support, and wellness within those schools. That involves making sure that they're resourced, that students and schools and teachers have what they need to not only meet the basic needs of students, but also to meet the other needs that they have to show up and be able to thrive. Also advocate for less punitive, more restorative practices. That could look like restorative justice practices. That could look like pushing for investments in more student supports like counselors, psychologists, mentoring programs, training and professional development around de-escalation. Another thing that I think is often taken for granted is just simply listening to children and establishing healthy communication patterns and relationships with them. I think this is really important because it helps to build trust and instills hope in them that someone actually cares to listen, cares about their well-being, and is there for them. If you're a parent or a guardian, get involved at your children's school to the amount that you're able. I mean, I know a lot of folks are working. My family, I'm from a low-income family myself. My family was working, but they showed up when they could. If you're not a parent, still get involved. There are always opportunities to volunteer, to mentor, to tutor, and so much more. Positive role models and adult interactions are powerful ways to really help disrupt these systems. And finally, I think the advocate in me has to say this, really call out systems and practices that are harmful to students and school environments. I think that's just the first, most basic level of advocacy. Calling things explicitly what they are and noting where that damage and harm is done, and then actively voicing your concerns at all levels of power. That starts with the classroom level, the principal's office, to the school board, to the superintendent, and on to the state house. I know anyone on this call would be willing to support you, and I can speak very explicitly for Ed Trust. We love to train folks up and build capacity. If you have questions about how to get in touch with your elected officials, I'm always here. And that also involves making sure that data is available at the school level, the district level, and the state level on discipline and school practices so that you can see what's happening in the schools and be able to call them out. You can't really actively and accurately address a problem or make it a priority without the proper information. So it really does take all of us to push back.
Thank you, and that's very important. I will say this, is no one should have a fear of jumping in the fray. Some people will say, well, why are you concerned? You don't have a child at one of these schools. Yeah, they're adults, but I live here and I'm concerned about all the children in our community. You do not have to be a parent with a child presently in the school system. You can have adult children, which you learn a lot from adult children. You learn because you've been through it. But you need to absolutely take part in the process, whether or not you are actively have a child in the system, because you are a citizen of this community, and that's important. So Judge Callaway, when they get before you and they're making the headlines, everyone wants to get involved. So what do you have for us?
I'm going to start where Reggie stopped and talk about the need and the importance of elections and electing the right people who are going to support all of our children in all of our communities. And you think about here in Tennessee, we have an election coming up in a little over a month in November. And we need to make sure that when we're voting for our governor and voting for our state legislatures and senators and representatives, that we are voting for people who will support education systems, will support our youth, will support learning everything that they need to be healthy citizens, that will support teachers learning about the culture and the backgrounds of each other. Because if we have teachers who are unable to learn about diversity, equity, inclusion based on what a governor or legislature might pass as a bill, then that's already going to hamper any efforts that we have to change our systems of racism and sexism and ableisms. And so we have to be advocates at the polling places, and we have to make sure that we are, as one of the lowest states around the country, voting rates, that we have to change that, and we have to make a difference at the voting box. And that goes for not even, just the governor and the state legislature, the representatives that go to the Washington and the federal state. It means our local elections as well. I'm very happy that I was elected and reelected for another term, but the voting turnout was so bad and so low for school board elections. And, for the elections all the way around, but we got to advocate at the voting booth. And we got to put people in office that can make changes, that can change our racist and oppressive systems. That's number one. And secondly, going down after you do your voting and you make your changes, then you constantly advocate and constantly keep talking to people about, why is this child behaving this way? Don't give up on our children. There are absolutely, as my Tom Ward from Oasis Center always used to say, there are no expendable children. We don't have any. We don't have any expendable children. And when people ask me, oh, you work with those bad children? I don't. I don't work with any bad children. I don't have any bad children. I work with children who may have made some bad mistakes, but I don't have any bad children. And we got to keep talking that talk and walking that walk as well. And then when it comes to the school system, we definitely have to support restorative practices. The schools that have true restorative practices from the principal on down are the ones who their grades are well, whose attendance are high, whose record for achievement with their scores. If you look at those schools that are really putting in the work to social and emotional learning and restorative practices, they're doing so much better. And, I like to call out some schools. I like to call out Whites Creek, who's turned around. I like to call out Fall Hamilton, Napier Elementary, DuPont Hadley Middle School, all of those schools who have, and there are so many more, who really have done a tremendous job of supporting restorative practices. I read a recent article before I close that talked about how some people are now talking about how social emotional learning is just a hidden way to get educators to do, the concept is just beyond me, but they're saying now that social emotional learning is a part of critical race theory, and we should not be doing social learning. I'm like, really? We should not be doing what we can to protect all children in the school system. Don't let those articles, don't let those conversations, don't let those people who say those things get by with that. Challenge it at every level, challenge it. And that's the way we make a difference. And then we shout out all of our mentors. I see Daryl Caldwell with Why We Can't Wait. Yes. Groups like that who are on this call, who are supportive of all of our efforts. Give them the support they need, whether it's monetary, whether it's just whatever hope that they can have. Give them support that they can continue to help work with those youth in our schools and to empower our youth and our parents to make a difference in their lives.
Wow. Well, this has been short, but very, very sweet and informative. I want everyone to understand why we have these lunch and learns, and this is the very reason, because it will take the best of all of us. Get rid of some of the prejudices you have of these bad kids you see on the news and a child shot another child. Think of the why. Think of what they have been through. And I think if you knew the true story of each one of these kids and each one of these sensational stories that the media puts out, you would have a different view. Because when I see those little babies in the Weaver Center, and I know what they've been through, and I do know if we do not work very hard to build some level of resilience and love, they will be those children that will be in that news story. And it will because we failed. It will be because we have failed as a community, as a society, and as good thinking people. So I hope that everyone understands this is mission critical. We have to break this cycle. We can no longer have our children being pushed into a pipeline that ends up with them in prison. And it's up to everyone on this call, everyone in this community. I thank this panel. We do have a survey if anyone can fill it out, but I am so, so blessed to have such strong advocates in our community for our children. So thank you very much, and thank all of you for being part of this community service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It takes a village.
Okay, it does. Thank you.